Hello and welcome back to our live coverage here at Pro Tour Ixalan. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Pro Tour winner Simon Gertzen. And, well, we saw him last round with his Jeskai approach deck against one of the more comboed decks in the format. But if you want to learn how good your deck is in Standard right now, you need to learn how good it is against Teemo Control. We're going to get a chance to see Teemo Energy in the hands of Mike Sigrist versus Guillaume Matignon with his, well, pretty unique approach to the Second Sun deck. Let's head down to our feature match area for round 13 at Pro Tour Ixalan. Hello and welcome to this round 13 at Pro Tour Ixalan. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Simon Gertzen, and we have two top names in the game. First up, Mike Sigrist from Team ChannelFireball, the only non-Hall of Famer on Team ChannelFireball. You know what? He is getting the record to put them all to shame right now. Just one loss for him thus far with his four-color energy deck. Also, obviously, of course, great finish in draft. On the other side of things, though, the 2010 World Champion Guillaume Matignon, he's not on a team, but he is representing very well. The French player with Jeskai approach and a perfect record in draft means that he's just the one loss thus far also. And, well, one more win for these guys and they really start thinking about top 8 contention. Mike Sigrist on the play, but with a mulligan 6, so he's going to be looking to find ways of winning back a little bit of card advantage somewhere. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Matignon starting with a full grip of 7, and, well, he's got islands in play, so he's a happy man. The Jeskai approach deck. Early doors, how much of it is about stopping all of the threats of Mike Sigrist, or how picky does Guillaume Matignon need to be, Simon?
He needs to be able to just stay alive for long enough that he can take over the game with Approach of the Second Sun. So this is a control deck that's actually not going for ultimate board control, that just wants to play a game that goes as long as possible. But he just wants to stay alive long enough for his basically one-card combo to win in the game.
We can see Sigrist's hand there. 2 copies of Vraska Relic Seeker. That's maybe a little bit clunky, but he's been able to improve quite a bit, drawing into Chandra Tortz's Defiance, and then Whirl of Virtuoso thanks to that Rogue Refiner. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, Guillaume Matignon, he's going to be able to make sure that his draws are pretty good from now on. With Search for Azcanta, at some point we may well see a transformation on that one, but in the meantime, it does mean that at the beginning of his upkeep, he is going to be able to decide whether or not he wants to draw the card that he initially sees, and that means that when it comes to finding counter magic for what may well be a flurry of planeswalkers in coming turns, he hopefully will have it at the appropriate moment if he wants to get into the mid and late game in good shape. Sigrist here, kicking things off with a Whirl of Virtuoso, and that one with the energy trigger on the stack met with the Harness Lightning, that meaning that we're not going to see any Thopters just yet from Sigrist, but in the meantime, it does mean that there are still plenty of potent threats for Mike Sigrist in hand.
Both players with really strong starts. Search for Azcanta for the control deck, and exactly the early energy creatures that Mike Sigrist wants for his 4-color energy strategy.
Another copy of Whirl of Virtuoso. Will this one resolve? We can see Matignon's hand here. He's got Torrential Gearhulk, approach the Second Sun for the late game. Uses Commit here, the commit half of Commit to Memory, in order to place that Whirl of Virtuoso a few cards deep, basically hoping to find a more permanent answer to it a little bit later.
Yeah, or just win the game before it really becomes a dangerous threat.
Yeah, I guess that if you just hit land drops consistently at this point, if you're Guillaume Matignon, then you know that at least for game 1, you should be in reasonable shape. Resolving 2 copies of Approach to the Second Sun, not too difficult before counter magic really becomes an issue. We have our first game win. Shaheen Sarani, noted control player. He is on control this weekend, up against Ramanap Red, though, dropping his first game to Austin Bersovic. Meanwhile, Mike Sigrist, he's also got the big red threats, playing out a Glorybringer here and successfully able to attack in, albeit briefly, as Harness Lightning able to finish off the dragon, with the little extra energy from Ether Hub being important to mean that there was exactly the 4 points needed to clean things up here.
That makes a huge difference, too. If Guillaume has to kill the Rogue Refiner, that's a significantly weaker creature.
So Azcanta the Sunken Ruin now around. if it ever works out that Matignon doesn't have anything else to do with his mana, then he can use it to search for non-creature, non-land cards. But also it means that he's got six mana available to him a little bit early, and Torrential Gearhulk, a big threat from these control decks once they hit 6.
He is only 1 mana away from Approach of the Second Sun, which is in his hand. He has great choices. He can just use a Scanta, but he also has Glimmer of Genius. He has that Torrential Gearhulk. He's not under too much pressure. 8 life is not a ton, but Mike is not threatening lethal next turn, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, and of course, the life gain on Approach of the Second Sun, not irrelevant. At some point, gaining the extra life there will prove pretty helpful for Guillaume Matignon. 8 life, not super safe, as Chandra Talks with Defiance comes down. And here comes a Torrential Gearhulk in response.
Yeah, flashing back commit to put Chandra back into the library.
There is, of course, the potential to cast Memory off Torrential Gearhulk as well, I believe, in other circumstances. But as things stand, commit the card that Guillaume Matignon goes for here. Sigrist with a handful of threats here, and that's kind of what you were looking for, I guess, against the Jeskai approach deck. Every removal spell that Mike Sigrist draws is a relatively low impact draw compared to any of these creatures that he's finding off the top of his deck here.
And Mike knows that time is running out. He's not dealt any damage this turn. His threat of Chandra got countered, and now Guillaume is reaching the territory where Approach of the Second Sun is just a huge threat.
Now, worth noting that while there are some lists of Approach the Second Sun, especially the blue-white lists that we saw a little while before Ixalan, that would run the full 4 copies of Approach, that not necessarily as necessary for this kind of a control build. It can spend a bit more time controlling things, and actually Guillaume, in his main deck, only running 2.
Yeah, but you have the Search for a Scanta, you have the Glimmer of Genius to reduce the time it takes to get the second copy. And with cards like Settle the Wreckage, this Jeskai deck, and of course the Harnessed Lightnings, this Jeskai deck actually has an easier time controlling when and how much damage to take.
So Approach of the Second Sun, number 1 gets cast, and the second copy is in hand for Guillaume Matignon here. So he's poised for victory here. All he needs to do is survive until his next turn. 15 life feels like it ought to be sufficient here, even with everything that Mike Sigrist is trying to put together. The fact that he's been able to gain that 7 life on 8 life, yes, it may have worked out that Sigrist could have found a way of closing this one out. 15, a lot of damage to deal though, especially when we know that Approach the Second Sun number 2 is, well, just an untapped step away. And I guess that the moment that Guillaume Matignon is tapping out to cast Approach the Second Sun, that sends a pretty strong message to Mike Sigrist that Matignon, unperturbed by almost anything that could come from the other side of the table.
Absolutely, and also Mike knows that in game 1 he's just heavily disadvantaged against this kind of deck.
And a little laugh there from Mike Sigrist. And no great surprises to him there that game ended the way it did. Obviously, he would have loved to be able to put something together, but he's going to have to go to his sideboard and have a little think if he's going to be able to win this one. 2 on the bounce is what he's going to need in order to push things back, get to a 12-1. We will have plenty more of that match and, of course, plenty more from our feature match area in general. But first, these messages.
Looking for a challenge? Magic Online offers monthly limited and constructed events which lead to the yearly Magic Online Championship. Download Magic Online at mtgo.com and start earning the points you need to enter. Head down to your local store and buy a box of Ixalan to receive a dino-sized booster. Each booster is filled with 4 rares or mythic rares, 4 premium foils, and an alternate art premium foil rare. Limit 1 per customer. Visit Ixalan.com to find a store.
Hello and welcome back to this round 13 here at Pro Tour Ixalan. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Simon Gertzen, and we're going to get a chance while our players are shuffling up for our main match, Game 2, to look in on one of our other matches going on in the feature match area. Andrea Mengucci of Italy up against Wilson Hunter, playing Mono White Vampires, a deck that's gained a lot of popularity, at least in our coverage team, this event. And it's one of the decks that's designed to be able to kind of go wide, go underneath, go faster and more aggressive than the Teamer energy lists. And here we see that kind of playing out. Life totals 5 to 14 in Wilson Hunter's favor. Plenty of ways of gaining life for the vampires, as one might expect. And in addition to that, just plenty of ways of going really wide on creatures. I mean, Mengucci's draw here, if you're facing a lot of creatures, not a bad one by any stretch. A couple of long tusk cubs early definitely make it a little bit trickier for attacks from Hunter, but that doesn't look like it's going to be enough to deter him here. Chef at Dunes, of course, able to pump the entire team. Big attacks here from Wilson Hunter.
And the biggest problem for teamers is that evasion. The flyers are just really, really difficult to deal with, and you definitely don't want to trade Long Tusk Cup for servo tokens.
Looks like that might be the world in which Andrea Mengucci is living, though. Lots of pump going on Wilson Hunter's side of things, and that meaning that this a relatively one-sided attack, lots of life gain, lots of creatures leaving the battlefield, but very few of them on the side of Wilson Hunter. That meaning that, well, the life total's 20 to 2 with not much to go here. We'll let this Andrea Mengucci untap and see if he can do something about this battlefield. But you know what? I think that we may very quickly find ourselves seeing Sigrist and Matignon in action again. Andrea Mengucci scoots them up. The writing's on the wall there. They'll be going to their Game 2. And we're going to get a chance to see our Game 2 between Mike Sigrist and Guillaume Matignon. Matignon taking a relatively straightforward Game 1, casting Approach the Second Sun twice, getting that game win very straightforwardly. After sideboarding, Mike Sigrist, well, he might have a few answers to that one. A little bit of counter magic, some negates, a copy of Spell Pierce as well, I think, that he's working with. We'll find out whether or not Matignon is using the same approach to win, or maybe he's got a different plan. These players kicking things off again. It's Matignon on the draw this time. Still the first one with a spell, though. In this case, Opt, one of the cards that he was most excited to see printed in Ixalan. He'd had some experience with it back in Invasion, and indeed playing the Invasion copy of Opt here. Gets to scry and draw a card, and then untap into, well, we'll find out what soon enough. Relatively a potent hand there from Sigrist. Nothing in the early turns of the game, but this is not necessarily a matchup characterized by who gets the first threat on the board on turn 2. Rogue Refiners means that he's going to be able to stay in threat relatively straightforwardly, though a Censor early on, meaning at least the first one, not going to be doing too much for Sigrist.
That's a superb use of Censor. Keeping board parity and trading your low impact card for one of the best cards in the energy deck in this matchup.
Yeah, and Censor on the draw, sometimes you find yourself just a little bit in the wrong spot where you can't catch any of the big spells because your opponent has a mana advantage, but they're able to perfectly deal with a 3-drop. And Rogue Refiner number 2 coming down. This one is Censor proof, but it is not Essence Scatter proof. And here we see a Spell Pierce played by Mike Sigrist, that really signaling how important the Rogue Refiner is to his game plan.
Yes, and that's mostly the goal with the cheap counter magic. It's not only to counter Approach of the Second Sun when Guillaume is already in control of the game, but it is to establish that board dominance. Creatures are one thing, but especially resolving Planeswalkers, that's a huge deal in this matchup.
Yeah, Spell Pierce, one of those pieces of counter magic that has found many a home in a tempo-based strategy, able to protect spells on the way down more so than stopping key threats on the other side of things. And we can see that there's plenty of threats for Sigrist to deploy in subsequent turns there. He's got a whole bunch of powerful threats and the lands to cast most of them. This is a nice position for Sigrist if he can find a way of maneuvering around what Guillaume Matignon has going on.
And he will most likely try to maneuver around Censor, as we see here. He doesn't want Guillaume to fire off another successful Censor.
And Essence Scatter once more coming down for Matignon. Bristling Hydra would have been a great threat to get on the battlefield. It is one of the cards that, once it's in play, can be very problematic for many decks to deal with, though Matignon has settled the wreckage in his list, which, even in spite of Hexproof, is a way of dealing with the big Hydra. cycles a land at the end of turn there. Matignon very keen on just making sure that he keeps his hand high on answers, because there are plenty of questions being asked by Mike Sigrist in this matchup. Actually, if Sigrist again tries to throw down something powerful, he may get away with it here. Matignon without too many answers in hand. It's going to be a matter of whether or not he wants to go for that 6-drop Vraska and potentially get censored, or perhaps go for one of the cheaper threats, which is not liable to get hit, at least by that one specific counterspell.
Yeah.
Dig, dig, dig. An opt means that there's a scry for Matignon. He does not like the look of that one. Draws a card. Has he found himself a piece of counter magic? Well, we'll find out soon enough, because I think that if he does, Chandra a great thing to get rid of. Has to cycle this censor.
And that's why it was so important to play around Censor. If you just play Raska here and Matignon opts into Censor, that's a huge swing.
And +1 ability, just dealing 2 damage to Guillaume Matignon, but having a Planeswalker on the battlefield, very, very important for a lot of decks against Control, because Control can struggle to deal with Planeswalkers as easily as it can perhaps some other threats. Matignon, though, drawing a very interesting card post-sideboard. Not one that we see in the main deck, but a great way of getting something going after sideboarding. The Locust God here coming down for him. It's costing him plenty of mana, but this is the kind of threat that can be a big problem for many decks in this format. It's a 4/4 flyer, so 4 toughness is definitely achievable in terms of all sorts of different damage outputs from Mike Sigrist. But when it dies, it returns to its owner's hand, and if you get to draw cards with the Locust God in play, then fairly rapidly you develop a whole army of flying 1/1 red and blue insect tokens.
And that's the most relevant part of the Locust God in this matchup, because it does give you an entirely different way of winning the game than Approach of the Second Sun. And as we said, if you are playing an Approach of the Second Sun deck against somebody bringing in 3 negates, that can be problematic.
Well, shields down for Matignon, had to tap out for the Locust God, and does lose it to Glorybringer, at least for now. Does require the exert from Glorybringer, so it won't be untapping in the next turn.
And there was another big swing for Mike Sigrist here. Guillaume realized that Mike was just deploying threat after threat after threat, and that just was something that he didn't have the right answers for this game.
Wow, that was a super fast game for Mike Sigrist. Yes, game 1 didn't go his way, but this, I guess, the dangerous thing about having a deck that's looking to answer a large proportion of what's going on the other side of things, if you happen to miss out on 1, even 2 answers, there are the power level of the threats from Team Energy is high enough that you can just find yourself in all manner of bother. Now we're going to get a chance to look across at one of our other games while these players sideboard. We're going to get to see a little bit more Andrea Mengucci against Wilson Hunter. No massive surprise here that Hunter has been able to get down a whole bunch of threats early on here. Legion's Landing working alongside that Metallic Mimic, which I'm guessing is naming vampires based on the +1/+1 counter we see here. And Maverin Fane, meaning that we're going to have plenty more vampires coming down for Hunter soon enough.
The fact that Metallic Mimic is still in play is a really good sign for Hunter, because this means that Andrea Mengucci probably didn't have a removal spell in hand at all.
Yeah, and already we see the transformation of that Legion's Landing. So a source of many, many more vampires if needed for Wilson Hunter, but also just an additional mana. Having a land in play that essentially was for free, you got to get an extra land in play without even having to use a land drop, means that the potential to power out larger Angel of Invention level threats later on, relatively straightforward.
And Hunter made an interesting trade here. He upgraded the Legion's Landing, but it cost him the Metallic Mimic. So that wasn't a clear victory.
Well, Mengucci, he's doing fine for land. He's got some energy to work with that Well of Virtuoso. Let's see what his next threat is. It's a Glorybringer. This is what Mengucci needed if he was going to find his way back into this match. Already a game down to Wilson Hunter's Mono White Vampires. Takes down Maverin Fame with an exerted Glorybringer. Gets a hit in for 4 to put Wilson back down to 20. And the lifelink that comes from all of these vampires in Wilson Hunter's deck, another reason that it represents kind of an interesting and pretty good choice for this metagame, because if we say that it's already pretty good against Temur Energy, it must also be fairly good against a lot of the other decks that are looking to be aggressive against Temur, because it has life gain and they don't.
Yes, like Ramonab Red or Mono Black Aggro.
Another copy of Maverick Fane coming down, and another copy of Legion's Landing, so generating yet another vampire token here. Worth noting that the legend rule may come into effect here at some point.
I do feel that Hunter overextended a bit. Losing that Metallic Mimic seems like a really big deal in this matchup.
Though 2 copies of Angel Invention in hand may signal that that was the reason he wanted to get an extra land in play on the cheap, as it were. Another copy of Glorybringer, killing off another Maverick Fane. Pretty soon it's going to be double dragons attacking in the red zone. At the moment they're kind of trading exert abilities. We'll give it another turn or so, but I think, actually, you know what? Let's see Mike Sigrist against Guillaume Matignon. I'm very intrigued to see, after what was so big a turnaround between games 1 and 2, how it's going to work out for this deciding game between these two 11-1 players. Absolute top of the standings, these two. 12 wins is definitely a point where you start thinking about what you're going to be doing on Sunday in terms of battling away for another day of Magic, looking to potentially pick up a trophy. Attune with Ether coming along from Mike Sigrist here. Though leading with an Ether Hub and having to spend the energy in order to use the Attune with Ether, not absolutely ideal, perfect start. Does fetch up the forest, so future green mana will be nice and straightforward for him.
And you do have that 2 energy to start with, which can be huge on Long Tusk Cup or just to fix your mana later on.
And Matignon with a hand that has lots of land, not too much in the way of interaction, does have that key disallow and a Glimmer of Genius to potentially get him there. But this is not the kind of hand that's going to be able to deal with threat after threat after threat coming from Sigrist. And we can see here, Servant the Conduit does not get answered with a removal spell. Instead, we see a cycle at the end of turn there from Guillaume Matignon.
Not only is it a relatively weak hand, he, just like in Game 2, doesn't have Search for Escanta. He doesn't have that easy way out of just finding the right answers and the win conditions when he wants them.
So from here on out, Mike Sigrist, he's got the mana that he can start pairing out real threats. Starts off with a Long Tusk Cub. And this does meet a disallow from Guillaume Matignon. Sigrist, I don't think he's necessarily going to mind too much. The big question is, he has a negate. Is he going to use it here?
That really depends on the context of his hand. I think he has a Chandra that he will not be able to protect anytime soon with that negate. So it's a good trade to get onto the battlefield. In a vacuum, though, you don't need to negate a disallow that's targeting your Long Tusk Cup.
Well, threats on the battlefield for Mike Sigrist. If he picked up a land there, it would have been fantastic. He could have got even more attacks in. As things stand, he may just go in with the Long Tusk Cub and then use that Servant of the Conduit in order to help him cast things. A little bit tight on energy, but thankfully at least the Long Tusk Cub will help out in that regard.
A bit tight on mana as well, right? It's he doesn't have all the time in the world, so delaying his aggressive potentially is a bit dangerous. And Guillaume has exactly the hand to punish that. He doesn't have early interaction, but he is holding Glimmer of Genius and Torrential Gearhulk, so if he's given time, he will take over this game.
Well, Rogue Refiner now coming down for Mike Sigrist. Just gradually eking his way to generating a little bit more energy. Swings with both of his creatures in here.
I like this decision a lot because he realized that drawing an extra card gets him closer to making land drops, and it's an extra free 2 points of damage because Servant of the Conduit gets to attack this turn.
All right, so each of these players just sort of trying to make their way into the mid-game here with slightly fiddly draws for each of them in different ways. Mike Sigrist would certainly love to have at least one more land to work with, and Guillaume Matignon, he's not had maybe as much interaction as we've seen in early games thus far for him. A big Settle the Wreckage would really change the face of this game, both in terms of, well, it would give Mike Sigrist lands, but it would also mean that any kind of an early start from Sigrist could just be wiped out in one go here.
It's not even clear if that would be a good trade for Matignon at this point. Would you really want to give your opponent 3 basics? And then they unleash the full power of their hand the next turn?
appetite for the unnatural has come in for Sigrist. Is that essentially his showing respect for Search First Canter?
It does have its targets, and oftentimes you just have so many dead cards in your main deck that you bring in cards that have a potential upside if you see an early Search First Canter, or you can just target a Gear Hulk with it. It's just better than having Magma Sprays after sideboarding, which are just completely dead.
Makes sense. And more attacks coming in from Sigrist here. Nickel and diming his way through this game thus far. And with 7 energy, he's actually threatening a fair amount of damage here. Guillaume Matignon. Going for the commit here on Long Tusk Cub, respecting the amount of damage that could come through from it.
And that's something that Sigrist has to be somewhat happy about, because it's not the power play he was afraid of. It's a relatively meek use of the turn.
Well, land drops being hit by Guillaume Matignon. He's hit 6. That's one of the magic numbers for this control deck, because now Torrential Gear Hulk is online. 7 is where Approach to the Second Sun becomes a factor, though it may well be that Matignon looks to hold back and cast it with a little bit more mana than that, so that he's safe against having some counter magic to protect it.
Yeah, and the price you pay for in any kind of Approach of the Second Sun deck is the first approach you cast is not really going to benefit you that much. 7 life is barely enough to contain the aggression that you're facing.
Well, there is a Root Bang Crag here for Mike Sigrist, so land drop hit, that's step 1 in what he wants to achieve here. Big attacks here from Mike Sigrist. I like this.
Yeah, and if this Gear Hulk resolves, that's a big deal.
10, 13. That's correct. That's.
Now, with the appetite for a natural in hand, there is the potential for the Gear Hulk to at least not be able to block here. But Glimmer of Genius does mean that Guillaume Matignon's draw is looking pretty good. 2 cards to the bottom, though, on that scry, though. He's digging for some fairly specific cards at this point.
And he really wanted to ambush a creature here. Now, once again, he needs to find answers to what's on the battlefield.
Yeah, where previously using a mass removal spell to deal with all those creatures may not have been exactly the kind of answer he was looking for, because it's be generating lands, at least if it was Settle the Wreckage. Now it might be something that Guillaume Matignon that's his best option. Has to cycle a Sensor here. Let's see what he finds. Could simply be too many threats here from Mike Sigrist. Guillaume Matignon on just 4 life.
Yeah, he just didn't find the right cards. He cast Glimmer of Genius. He cast the Gear Hulk, but it was dealt with. And now he's just scrapping to stay alive.
Kills off a Rogue Refiner. There's still 4 damage coming through. Has to use a commit on a Servant of the Conduit.
Now anything wins Mike Sigrist the game. If he has Chandra.
And that's enough for the handshake. Mike Sigrist advancing to 12-1. Team ChannelFireball, they've got to be pleased with that. Getting the win over Guillaume Matignon. Matignon will have to pick up his win somewhere else, because that match all completed. And as you see from our feature match area, most of our matches are now all over. We do get a chance to see a little bit more of Andrea Mengucci up against Wilson Hunter, though. We're still in their game 2, and the board looking a little bit more complicated now as we head back to things. Angel of Invention in play for Mengucci here, potentially thanks to a confiscation coup in the graveyard there. And lots of servos. Aketra's Monument in play for Wilson Hunter. That has certainly helped him generate a few additional creatures, but the quality level of the creatures for Andrea Mengucci here just through the roof, and Wilson Hunter on 6 life. He's got to be a little bit worried here.
Yeah, I would go like this. Oh, the Vampire Zeal. No, you got it.
Oh, Mengucci there, just joking around a Vampire Zeal. It's, to be honest, when you're getting used to what this white deck might do, it's not completely off the cards. A little smile there from Mengucci as he picks up the Game 2 win. They will be going to a Game 3. And in terms of where you apportion your testing for a Pro Tour, if you're Mengucci and you're on Teamer Energy, how much do you spend devoting to the mirror, and how much do you say, all right, what other things might possibly be a big concern?
So in practice, I think that a lot of players at this tournament probably could have used more practice in the mirror, even though they will have made it a big importance to test for it. I think because of how Teamer Energy plays, if you play against a control deck, if you play against a mid-range deck, against an aggro deck, you will learn the ins and outs of the deck. You don't need to play against, for example, mono-black aggro specifically, or black-red aggro specifically, because your game plan against aggro is relatively straightforward. It's the same independently of which aggro deck you're facing. But mono-white aggro is actually a little bit different because it doesn't have the same amount of reach as the Hazoret decks.
Interesting stuff. Meanwhile, for Hunter, I'm guessing that he simply didn't really need to think about the mirror at all and could just say, right, where are my targets? Let's see whether or not I can reliably hit them.
No, if you bring mono-white vampires to such an event, you test against Teamer Energy, you test against Ramonab Red, you test against the control decks, you test against the established metagame, not against a mirror that's so unlikely to happen. We had 5 mono-white vampires player in day 1, and all of them made day 2.
Fantastic stuff. And I guess that this is what we see in a metagame that's slightly more developed. This Pro Tour, of course, came after the World Championships, came after a couple of nationals events. So players going into this event, they had a little bit more time to figure out where Ixalan fits in this standard format. And it's been really interesting to me to see how that has worked out in terms of both deck choices, but also just the level of play of some of these players. I mean, we see sort of Owen Turtenwald in the feature match area playing Teamer Energy. He'll have been playing that exact list for months now. And I know that the whole of Team Peach Garden Oath, they were getting in 10 hours a day of practicing principally standard.
That was weeks ago. So I think looking at, in particular, Reed Duke, Owen Turtenwald, and William Jensen, that's probably some of the best Teamer Energy magic you can see this weekend.
The best magic from arguably the best deck in the format. One has to think that at least some of them may well still be troubling our feature match area in coming rounds. This is, of course, round 13. We've got a few more rounds of magic in our feature match area of standard before we cut to the top 8. And at this point, this is where there will be a lot of players that their sights are very firmly set on what they need to do in these last few rounds. Do they still have a loss to give? Do they have to win every single round from now on? That's the way that a lot of these players are going to be thinking. As we kick off our game 3 for Wilson Hunter against Andrea Mengucci, and surprise, surprise, it's another Legion's Landing on turn 1 for Wilson Hunter.
And so far, both of these starting hands are didn't look too great, but Wilson Hunter managed to pick up an Adanto Vanguard, so now suddenly he has a super aggressive draw.
Yeah, the Adanto Vanguard, the fact that you can pay life to give it indestructibility means that it's a threat that will get to hang around and synergizes very nicely with that Legion's Landing because it's a creature that you really don't mind getting into the red zone each and every turn with. Yeah,
and the threat of activation actually makes Mengucci almost unable to deal with it because you cannot just spend a Harnessed Lightning on it if you know your opponent can just pay 4 life. I actually picked Adanto Vanguard as my card of the day yesterday to pay homage to the fact that a lot of players had brought very innovative decks to this established metagame, and Adanto Vanguard was for me one of the surprises because I really didn't expect this card, which is great and limited, to show up in Constructed.
Yeah, and we can see lots of cards that celebrate the power of Ixalan in hand here for... Ixalan's Binding, celebrating Ixalan, and then we have Shephet Dunes and Dusk's Dawn back from Amonkhet in hand for Hunter. Really interesting mix of cards that haven't seen very much standard play yet, but you know what, I think after this weekend they might be seeing quite a bit more play.
And did you just see this exchange? Magma Spray for the token generated by Legion's Landing. That's not something you're happy about.
And the synergy between the lifelink on various vampire tokens and Adanto Vanguard, not something to be missed. Ultimately, it means that it's very, very straightforward to keep those indestructible 2/1s in play for quite a bit of time.
Something I love about mono-white vampires is even if your starting hand isn't the best, if you just find Legion Conquistador, suddenly you have almost more value than you can utilize.
Yeah, it turns out that Squadron Hawk ability, just being able to search out additional copies, remains just a very powerful thing to be doing. 4 mana being tapped here. There's Ixalan's Binding. We're not going to be seeing any more Servants of the Conduit anytime soon. Ixalan's binding a really interesting card, and I've seen it employed to great effect in all sorts of different matches. The fact that we can exile creatures with it, the fact that we can exile essentially all copies, past and future, of a creature. Very powerful indeed. Rogue Refiner coming down here for Andrea Mengucci.
And Mengucci is just helplessly looking at this board.
Yeah, normally big smiles from the Italian, but he's having to really work to stay in this game. Already the life total's 10-21 in Wilson Hunter's favor.
He's holding Magma Spray, a Braid, and 2 Harnessed Lightnings. And he cannot deal with the board.
Oh, wow. If you're looking for a big creature to put on the battlefield that also kind of laughs in the face of these 1-for-1 removal spells, Angel of Invention certainly qualifying, using it to put 2 servos onto the battlefield here, and that meaning that it's difficult to really generate too much value here.
An interesting spot with the Fabricate ability here. You do have to choose whether you want servos or to put +1/+1 counters on the creatures. Now, if you get the +1/+1 counters, that can have a huge benefit, but you're also exposing the Angel to a removal spell.
Yeah, in this case, Wilson Hunter sniffing out that there may well be removal in hand for Andrea Mengucci.
And that's very smart because his creatures didn't have couldn't be targeted thus far, so you can be almost certain that Andrea is holding a removal spell or multiple, as we know. And the servos, of course, synergizing really, really nicely with Chef at Dunes. Even if Andrea has a Glory Bringer here, he's just getting overrun.
Yeah, 4 life left, 4 creatures on the battlefield. This is going to be a very tough game for Andrea Mengucci to come back from here because Temur Energy, while it has many, many tools in its arsenal, mass removal is not something it's really known for. Bristling Hydra, he's got so much energy. Surely if the energy jack's generating energy, that should be all you need, right? Apparently not.
No, it is the first creature that can at least block the Vanguard profitably or without dying if Andrea invests some mana, but it's possible that it's just already over here.
Well, Dusk. Destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. You know, only one side of the battlefield has creatures with power 3 or greater. That's enough to get the handshake for Andrea Mengucci. Fantastic win there from Wilson Hunter. He advances to 9-4. He's definitely in a rough spot. Like, if he wants to make top 8, he's going to have to put things together relatively fast from here. But you know what? There's still time to do it. And these white vampires, when it comes to standard, they seem like a fantastic choice. Absolutely loving the aggression that we're seeing from some of these decks trying to battle against Temur Energy, but there's a reason that we've been calling Temur Energy the best deck in the format. Right now, the leader in the standings is Mike Sigrist, who was able to defeat Guillaume Matignon in that last round. Temur Energy lost game 1, but this is the reason that we play best of 3, able to bounce back after sideboarding. That the end of our round 13 here at Pro Tour Ixalan. Do not go anywhere, though. We have plenty more magic for you right after these messages.
All right, 13 rounds gone. That means there are 3 to go, and that means every result really is critical. Now, we usually say round about this point that the 4th loss is what puts you right on the margin. 12 and 4 might be on the outside looking in, might get you in. It depends on the last round pairings. It depends on team dynamics, who's playing against who, whether you know someone who you really want to get in the top 8, if you know someone who you really want to eliminate from the top 8 because of the debt you might face on Sunday. But because this field is larger than your typical Pro Tour across the season, that probably means it is tougher to make it in at 12 and 4. So the players with 3 losses still control their destiny. Players with 4 losses struggling, hoping for some good tiebreak news down the stretch. So it's deck tech time once again here at Pro Tour Ixalan, one of my favorite archetypes, one of my favorite players. Here comes Grixis Control and Shaheen Soorani.